This is Democracy Now! As we broadcast on the road, beginning our, well, close to 70-city tour right here in Seattle, Washington. Juan?
Well, with the Obama administration's increasing focus on drug-related violence in Mexico, calls to rethink how the U.S. has fought the so-called war on drugs are growing louder. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton acknowledged last week that, quote, what we've been doing has not worked. But advocates of legalizing and regulating marijuana were dealt a blow when President Obama laughed off their question during the president's first live internet town hall on Thursday.
There was one question that was voted on that ranked fairly high, and that was whether legalizing marijuana would improve the economy and job creation. And I don't know what this says about the online audience, but I just want, I don't want people to think that this was a fairly popular question. We want to make sure that it was answered. The answer is no, I don't think that is a good strategy to grow our economy. So, all right.
Well, my next guest knows what it's like to be on the front lines of fighting the war on drugs in this country and doesn't think marijuana is a laughing matter. Norm Stamper is a 34-year police officer who retired as Seattle's chief of police in 2000. His successor, Gil Kurlikowski, has just been nominated to be President Obama's drug czar. But Norm Stamper supports legalization of marijuana. He's an advisory board member of the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, known as NORML. He's a speaker for the 10,000-member Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. Norm Stamper is the author of Breaking Rank, a top cops expose of the dark side of American policing. And he's joining us now via video stream, joining us from the island on which he lives. In fact, Norm Stamper, where do you live?
I live on Orcas Island, which is in the San Juan Islands in Washington State.
Well, we thank you so much for being with us. Why do you support the legalization of marijuana? It may surprise many to hear that the former police chief of Seattle, who was in charge during the Battle of Seattle, supports normalizing marijuana.
I actually support the legalization of all drugs, and in fact, the more dangerous or sinister or sensationally reported the experience of certain drugs, the greater the justification for the government as opposed to drug cartels and street traffickers to regulate that commerce. There's been more harm done by the drug war than good. We have spent $1 trillion prosecuting that war since Richard Nixon proclaimed drugs public enemy #1 and declared all-out war on them. And what do we have to show for it? While rates can fluctuate, drugs are more readily available today at lower prices and higher levels of potency than ever before. So it's a colossal failure. And the only way to put these cartels out of business and to restore health and safety to our neighborhoods is to regulate that commerce as opposed to prohibiting it.
And Norm Stamper, your reaction to the comments of both Secretary of State Hillary Clinton when she was in Mexico last week and of President Obama?
Well, quoting a friend and colleague of mine, a Superior Court judge from California, reacting to the Secretary of State's comments, she described the problem accurately. The solution was wrong. I think President Obama's remarks could be interpreted several different ways. I've had numerous reactions to comments that I made about it last week, and some saying, oh, cut the president some slack, give him a break. What he was saying, possibly, was that give me a break of all the issues that we're facing. You know, an imploding economy, healthcare issues, energy, education. How could we even possibly think that marijuana is such a big issue? So he may, in fact, have been suggesting that the drug itself was not a big issue. I don't think that's how most people took it. I think most people took it as a dismissal of a very serious issue. There are millions and millions of people who are marijuana smokers today. They're not all stoners in the stereotypical sense of that word. Many of them smoke marijuana because they cannot tolerate opioids, and they are terminal cancer patients, for example, or people suffering debilitating, intractable pain. Many don't smoke the drug at all, but care very deeply about our civil liberties and believe that the course of the drug war has simply been wrong and misguided. And it's not a laughing matter. It is, in fact, something that needs to be taken seriously.
And Norm Stamper, could you talk about your own evolution on this issue? Obviously, as a veteran, a policeman, and then a police chief, you had to incarcerate at various times people who were drug users, not just drug traffickers. And the evolution of your thinking on this issue.
My first epiphany was as a beat cop, a rookie beat cop. I had arrested a 19-year-old in his own home in possession of marijuana. Had him in the backseat of my police car. This was incidentally after having kicked in his door on the strength of having smelled what we described in those days in our police reports as burning green vegetable matter. And I had him hooked up, had him in the backseat of my caged police car. I was driving him to jail, and it came to me. I could be doing real police work. I could be intervening in domestic violence situations. I could be looking for the suspect who was carrying away my beat with daytime residential burglaries. I could be doing something, in other words, to stop the kind of crime that hurts people, scares people, causes people to change the way they live. That was my first experience throughout my career, moving up through the ranks, moving ultimately from San Diego, where I spent 28 years in that police department, to Seattle. I sort of refined my views and began to speak out much more publicly about the harms of the drug war and about alternatives to that war.
Norm Stamper, what do you think should happen to the hundreds of thousands of drug offenders who are currently in jail?
Well, I think those who are in jail for nonviolent offenses should have their cases reviewed case by case, and I believe that given the fact that we had an explosion in the construction of jails and prisons, particularly during the 80s, we need to reserve those jail spaces, those cells, for people who are certifiably dangerous, those who have made it clear that they don't belong among the free in our society because they're simply too dangerous. And yet we have those tens of thousands of cells, hundreds of thousands of cells being occupied by nonviolent drug offenders. I would release those who, on a case-by-case basis, can reasonably be predicted not to cause problems for society. I think there's much more comprehensive drug policy reform that's necessary first.
And Norm Stamper, here in New York, the state legislature and the governor have, in the recent days, reached final agreement on ending, for the most part, the draconian Rockefeller drug laws. They actually, the press reports today are that they've actually agreed, as part of the new budget, to close 3 state prisons, and clearly there will be some resentencing of some of the former people who have been in jail on nonviolent drug offenses. Your sense of how the mandatory sentencing around drug offenses particularly have affected the racial disparities in our prison system on the issue of drugs?
Wildly disproportionate numbers of people of color, young people, poor people, have gone to jail and ultimately to prison behind this drug war for decades now. No one will convince me that racism and discrimination does not take place. How much of that is individual, how much of that is institutional or structural, is something for others to argue. The bottom line is a whole lot of these people have been uprooted from their communities, detached from their families. They've lost employment, they've lost student loans, they've lost public housing, and they've lost their freedom. The Rockefeller laws, of course, as you describe them, I think have been seen by an awful lot of people as draconian. And when you stop and think about the huge numbers of people who have been in prison for nonviolent drug offenses, and most of those for simple possession of marijuana, it's just heartbreaking. I'd say it's about time. About time would have been decades ago, but literally back in the 70s. Mandatory minimums are institutionalized injustice, and it's so gratifying finally to see that they are becoming the relic that they should have been determined years ago.